You'll forgive my slightly tongue-in-cheek reference to St. Valentine's Day today, as love is in the air, and we're spreading a bit of NetScaler love and trying to understand why organizations of all sizes love Citrix NetScaler and rely on NetScaler to do the job of many other component parts that they used to have. Maybe just though, a quick introduction to cloudDNA. As a business where we've seen a niche area in the market to be able to provide a dedicated Citrix NetScaler practice here in the UK. And we offer that out directly to the end user community and then also to the UK channel as white label services and as a UK footprint for global and EMEA partners. So if you're calling in or you're joining this webinar from further afield than the UK and you would like to talk to us about helping to deploy global rollouts for your customers, that's something we're happy to do. Our engineering team is fully certified to the highest levels with Citrix, and we offer full security clearance to take into those secret environments. So you can rely on us to bring that trusted advisor status, not just from this component, but right the way through to the endpoint of the engagement. Okay, so today we're looking at NetScaler. Here we are at cloudDNA on a beautiful afternoon, and it's Valentine's Day. Well, let's get back to basics, though, and we need to understand a little bit about Citrix NetScaler as a product. So where's it from? What's it all about? Are they a fly-by-night? No, they're not. 15 years this year since NetScaler came onto the marketplace, the West Coast startup over in the US. And about the same time, another organization came onto the marketplace, which you may remember this screenshot on the left. Back in the days when Google only had 25 million pages indexed, quite a long while ago, and clearly Google's gone a long way since then, and similarly NetScaler's taken up that mantle to increase the technologies and increase the end user experience, and certainly some of Google's success could be put down to NetScaler. Over 14 billion pages on there. That probably changed by a couple of billion since I wrote this slide deck earlier in the week. But ultimately, what we're looking at is how NetScaler's grown over the course of the last 15 years to become the de facto standard for some of the world's biggest cloud operators. Now, at the moment, around 75% of global internet users pass through Citrix NetScaler on a daily basis. That's 1 in 4 people that pick up an iPad or a tablet or a workstation or whatever they do to get onto the internet. About 1 in 4 of those is not touching NetScaler, but more importantly, 3 out of 4 are doing. And that's pretty much because NetScaler now fronts up over 10 million global websites. It's quite an achievement. Now, the thing with that as well is that these websites are not just little bits and pieces here and there. Some of the biggest names in cloud architecture are right up there at the top of the list. We've referenced Google already, but you may not be aware that iTunes and Amazon and eBay and all these other very, very large operators use Citrix NetScaler to deliver their promises and their SLAs and ensure that the service is always available for their customers wherever they may be on the planet. Interesting. It always comes down to this same principle, though. We're connecting users to data. As the endpoints start to get more diverse with tablets and smartphones, smart TVs even nowadays, my goodness, a colleague of mine even has an IP-enabled refrigerator so that his energy supplier can see how efficiently it's running. The world is getting more connected. And the challenges that we're faced with in that respect is how do we move on from there? How do we get this content out to users? We can put as much tin as we like in the data center to actually create the content, but we need to find a way to get it to the end user in an effective manner. So generally speaking, in the majority of instances, there's a band-aid solution applied. I'm going to use this reference throughout the rest of our Essential Guide series. I quite like this idea of a band-aid solution. A sticking plaster put on a little piece of the network that's not quite right to provide us a single point of product, to work in a metaphor sense, to give us the load balancers and application firewalls and performance monitoring, all those different component parts that we need to be able to deliver our content out to our end users. Now, the problem comes is each one of these individual component parts is an expense we don't really need. We need to find somewhere to put it in real estate terms. We need to put power and cooling around that device. We also need to understand what that device is and how it works and what it does. So somebody needs to go and learn how to use it. And then there's considerations on a management basis. If I make application firewall changes, is there any consideration for the other component parts? Well, with multiple vendors in that stack, it starts to get a little bit tricky to manage. So just to set the scene so everybody's on the same playing field today, we're looking at taking all of these individual point products and putting them into a single device. That's the basic principle of Citrix NetScaler. The various component parts to give you a secure access remote solution for your users, wherever they may be, consolidating all of those component parts down into a single platform, that's our application delivery controller. Okay, it's not unusual. There are plenty of vendors that offer these sort of things. So what do we need to really make sure when we're looking at purchasing ADCs or application delivery controllers? It comes down to the functionality. The more functionality on the ADC, the fewer point products we need to be able to deliver the content out to our users and hit those SLAs. And by default, the fewer point products we have, the lower the cost, or the lower the total cost of operating that service. So it's a good point to note at this stage that NetScaler features over 2,000 features. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of those today because clearly we haven't got time to do that. But we'll just give you an indication of some of the features and benefits of NetScaler throughout the course of the rest of this slide deck. And then from there, hopefully, you'll start to see why the biggest cloud providers use it and why it might be suitable for your own environment. So let's take a little bit of a skip in here. The world's most advanced cloud network platform is quite a statement for Citrix to make, and the PDF brochures which are available from citrix.com give you a good rundown of some of those technologies. But we've just kind of simplified that PDF for the purpose of today's session to give you a little bit of a feel about how NetScaler stacks up. So firstly, there are 3 editions, and these are chosen depending on the actual requirement. It's a very versatile platform, and in certain instances, we might just need a bit of basic load balancing. But there are 3 editions with increasing functionalities to be able to consider all of the component parts to give you that full feature set to be able to maximize the ROI, the return on your investment. Now, we're not going to go through every single one of these pieces. We've not got time for that today, but I just want to point out a couple of bits which should be relevant and might be of interest. First and foremost, data stream is a bit of a unique in the marketplace at the moment. Citrix have been long aware that web application tiers often find a bottleneck when they're retrieving data from the SQL tier. So data stream has been introduced a couple of releases ago to allow NetScaler to optimize the SQL performance. And when we're saying optimize, what I'm basically saying is we're reducing the latency, but we're increasing the speed as well. So by reducing the latency, it takes less time to run a query. And because it takes less time to run a query and populate that into the web app, then by default, the web app can deliver that content out to the end user faster to increase the performance for them. As we're looking to manage big data, this is a real key benefit for a lot of organizations. And 2 days ago, if you're watching this live, Bet365 put a public press statement out about how they've utilized Citrix NetScaler in front of a Microsoft SQL Server environment, and that ultimately has given them far greater user density in there and far faster service. For Bet365, that's a really important thing because, as you know, live gaming websites are really driven by the speed, and their customer base is driven by the speed. In other words, they wouldn't have achieved their 10 million customers if it wasn't for NetScaler delivering that service in a timely fashion. There's a lot of conversation topics around horses at the moment over here in the UK, but ultimately, if you want to gamble, speed is of the essence for these kind of things. It's really important for them, but the same applies if you're looking at more traditional kind of environments. Perhaps you're in the enterprise, perhaps you're in that kind of environment where latency matters, such as the finance markets. Anywhere where you're utilizing SQL, then data stream, which comes with every single NetScaler in the standard edition, is a feature that you should look into. Okay, let's have a look at some of the other bits and pieces in here that are relevant. Global load balancing isn't new. I fully appreciate that, but again, we want to make sure everybody's on the same playing field today. Business continuity and disaster recovery is a simple mechanism to fail over between data centers. My primary fails, my secondary takes over. So you're in that position then where they're constantly got service available for our users wherever they may be. But if we're a larger organization, proximity load balancing can then come into play as well. What do we mean by that? Well, very simply, when a user connects to our service, we can point them to the closest resource, either geographically, or we can do that from a latency perspective to ensure that the performance is as fast as possible for every user, wherever they may be. Now, that could also work that we use that for localization purposes. Perhaps you've got a multilingual workforce or multilingual user base, and by default, we want to point them to the most relevant content. My simple explanation for this is type in google.com to your web browser and see where you end up. In the vast majority of instances, unless there's some very dodgy masking and proxy work going on, you'll find that you'll actually be directed to localized content so that the search results are relevant for your needs. Now, capacity load balancing is an extension to that. If we run out of capacity in our primary data center, we can move user workloads around to other data centers within our estate, or in the cloud for that matter. Now, this then means that we can really maximize the efficiency by running very lean data centers or reducing the volume of data centers that we have across the planet, and we can just move the workloads around in a follow the sun basis. So we get maximum efficiency all the way through. It's a bit of a theme about this service level and efficiency, but clearly these are the things that matter to the vast majority of organizations. Now, when efficiency really matters is down to power and real estate, cooling costs and management costs. So advanced server offload gives us the combination of compression and caching and SSL encryption directly on the NetScaler appliance. Now, many organizations will historically do this with the web tier, but by default, if you're taking some content and then you're asking that web server to compress that and then to encrypt that, your overhead on your resource is greater, and subsequently you can support fewer users per server. As a result, we add more servers, and this leads to the huge data centers that you see across the planet and within the collateral that is published by many organizations. So by taking those computationally resource-intensive tasks away from the web tier and placing them onto the NetScaler, things like compression, then we can remove that workload from the back-end tier, but still deliver the content out to the end users. In other words, I get more users supported for fewer physical servers in the background. As we look to SSL encryption, the vast majority of organizations I'm speaking to this year are looking to move over to 2048-bit SSL keys. So NetScaler has industry-leading 2048-bit transaction per second ratings. And this is important now, as we find that in many instances, application delivery controller vendors will give us a bulk encryption capability, which is great. I can do many gigabits of encryption at any time. But crucially, what we're finding is because that encryption is made up of many, many thousands of tiny packets, it's the volume of transactions per second that matter. In the very large appliances, such as the one seen on the right of the screen, this is going up to 98,000 transactions per second, which is huge. Now, compare that to other vendors on the market, and you start to see how Citrix Mind is working, as really looking at what the problems are in the real world and taking those out and giving us a solution that's straight out of the box that helps with that. Now, you'll also see caching there as well. And this is really important as we look to facilitate that server offload, because if you think about what happens on a web server, an application server, and this could be your enterprise type applications, or it could be your customer facing web front end, a lot of that content is duplicated over and over again for the various users that request it. So NetScaler can sit in between the users and the workload and the servers. And anytime when we see a repetition of requests for a particular piece of content, well, we can cache that response and serve it direct from the NetScaler. Put it into perspective. We have tickets come out for a new concert featuring your favorite popular music artist. And suddenly thousands and thousands of people want to check the stadium plans and the details of which tickets are available for which venue. So rather than run that query every single time, the NetScaler can cache that query and deliver it directly from the NetScaler appliance. By default, we use the back-end workload less, and we can reduce the server count. We've got some fascinating statistics on here, and the best one I've seen is Transport for London, who managed to reduce their server count by 95%. Now, over here in the UK, electricity is still a very expensive thing. And if every server is running around about £500 per year, then clearly reducing, and that's in electricity costs, then clearly reducing that server count by 95%, and each one of those servers by default is costing us £500, you can start to see how the maths work out. Reducing server count, giving us the best possible performance, it's all adding to that efficiency and end user experience again. Okay, what else have we got? CloudBridge. You might have seen some bits and pieces about this. Now, CloudBridge is just undergoing a little bit of a transformation, which is under NDA at the moment. I will be doing another webinar about this subject very shortly, and it'll be appearing on my blog, of which I'll give you the details in a little while. But CloudBridge gives us a mechanism to seamlessly and securely give an optimized link from our data center into the cloud. Now, this could be our own data centers elsewhere, but chances are you'll probably use GSLB for that. Or more likely, this is for third-party offerings. So you can effectively support hybrid clouds using your existing infrastructure and NetScaler to bridge from your cloud to theirs. If you start to look at the capabilities of this, it's based around the Cisco GRE protocol, so it's particularly transparent. It makes life really, really easy. There's a whole range of different methodologies to achieve these features that we're talking about today. But again, we're trying to avoid that band-aid solution mentality. And having this functionality directly in the one box, again, helps with the efficiency and life in general. With Application Firewall, we add the industry's fastest web app security, which works on a hybrid security model. Now, we still need to have our front-end network firewall, of course we do. But ultimately, the more traditional vulnerabilities that are taken care of by those network firewalls are probably ignored nowadays by these more advanced attacks. I read a very interesting piece a couple of days ago, which we'll be blogging about the level of these attacks over the course of 2013 and how the attack vectors are changing. But the thing with an application firewall from Citrix NetScaler is that we can very simply teach it what is correct behavior, and then we can block anything that is not. Now, that means then that we can help with things like PCI DSS requirements. If you're looking at taking e-commerce, for example, over your connections, you need to have some kind of mechanism to ensure that there isn't any SQL injection and your customers' credit card details don't go missing. Well, this feature gives you exactly that. And in fact, Citrix sit on the PCI DSS board as an advisor of what is technically possible. So there's some interesting features and bits and pieces in there. And by no means are these a complete list. It just gives you an idea. But some of the other functionalities in there, from a security perspective, things like an SSL VPN to support bring your own device or mobile work styles or work shifting, as the marketing guys are calling it this time. Things like DOS attacks and DDoS attacks, man-in-the-middle attacks from DNSSEC, and things like cross-site scripting, and then things like SAML 2.0, so that we can then support a single sign-on to those web third-party software as a service offerings directly from our Citrix NetScaler. This means then that we can run to a system using Cloud Gateway, another feature that comes along with NetScaler functionality, to be able to have a single point of access for our users to get all of their content, not just the stuff that's on site. Now, by doing that, it means that we've got obviously a much easier life for our users. They're not looking for passwords everywhere. But also we've got a better control of what's going on. So again, have a look out for the cloudDNA Essential Guide to Cloud Gateway, and we'll explain further about that. For those very high security requirements, FIPS 140.2 hits the mark for you guys as well, big in the public sector over here in the UK due to a government directive a few years ago. Again, not a complete list, but just giving you an indication of how these things stack up. So once we've established what functionality we need from this NetScaler device, it's then necessary to actually understand how much traffic is going to be passing through the appliance. So NetScaler appliances come in a range of flavors. First and foremost, we have the MPX high-performance hardware, an image of which sits at the bottom of the screen. So these are available from 500 megabits through to 50 gigabits. And these ultimately give you a high-performance methodology to be able to deliver all that component. Within there are certain physical devices, and the license key will determine how much throughput is available. I'll come into that shortly in the next couple of slides. VPX virtual appliances offer the same principles of operation and functionality, but in this instance what happens then is because we're running a virtual appliance, it's hosted on your own server infrastructure, we get much smaller capacities at the entry level at 10 megabits and run through to about 8 gigabits of traffic throughput. There are certain limitations for SSL encryption and the such you should be aware of. And again, if you need advice as to how the NetScaler appliances stack up, then give us a call or get in contact. We'll help you out with that. Now, the SDX high-performance hardware with virtual architecture takes a combination of the both. So that very high-performance hardware that gives us all those features we've spoken about before, but with a virtual architecture so we can segregate individual requirements. This is starting to get quite interesting. Let me explain a little bit further about how this works. NetScaler TriScale is a bit of a marketing piece that's going around that's giving us an indication on how NetScaler scales. That's the clues in the question. First and foremost, as we look to scale up, this is pay as you grow. Start with a 500 megabit throughput appliance, add a license key, and it will take it up to 1 gigabit. No hardware rip and replace, just straightforward. Add a license key and the extra capacity is there. Now that can be done perpetually, or you can do it for a 90-day burst period if you're anticipating high user counts at a particular time of year. The obvious example for that would be e-commerce. So in November, we can apply a larger license key to our NetScaler, run it for 3 months, and then after the sales have finished and the festive season has finished, then we can drop that back down again to a more modest traffic management level. It helps us get the maximum out of our investments and total cost of ownership comes down. Ultimately, it saves us from over-provisioning just because we think we might grow in the future. As we look at scale out at the bottom there, this is expandability. This is the ability to have 32 appliances in a single IP stack so that we can effectively cluster those devices together and give a certain amount of elasticity to the contribution that the ADC gives. What I mean by that is we can put more or less appliances in that stack to manage traffic levels as we see them. But today we're just going to have a little peek at this scaling of consolidating appliances. Really key piece of messaging here at the moment. So let's look at a typical example in an enterprise environment. Here's my SharePoint users, and we put an application delivery controller in front of SharePoint to give us the best possible performance, a bit of security, and so on. Now, as we look to add additional services in there, it's quite traditional in smaller environments that our Exchange service and our Link service would share that application delivery controller. But as these services get busy, we don't want a run on Link to have an impact on the performance of SharePoint, or vice versa. So what tends to happen is in the vast majority of larger organizations, we'll have multiple application delivery controllers deployed in the data center, each of which is responsible for the delivery of a single component part, like Exchange or SharePoint. Now, if you remember back to earlier in the slide deck, this is very reminiscent of our point product mentality, and that's not really a good fit in many instances. So perhaps there's a better way of doing it. If we take that workload of application delivery controllers and we basically migrate those into one very big box that allows us to have all of those application delivery controllers running in a single platform, well, then that becomes a service delivery controller. And this is really where NetScaler SDX comes into play. Anywhere between 5 and 50 gigabits of throughput, depending on the device, and up to 40 completely isolated instances within that appliance. Now, you'll notice on the image, if you're very keen-eyed, that it says it's a NetScaler MPX appliance. And I've done that on purpose to remind me that NetScaler SDXs and MPXs share the same hardware. So in the same way as we can apply a license key to increase the capacity, we can also apply a license key to change from MPX to SDX, and this allows us then to run this virtual architecture within the appliance. Now, the reason I've kind of played around on this one, this particular topic of Triscale, is it's particularly relevant as we look to the way things are progressing in the future. Today's networks are a fairly fixed and brittle kind of affair. Anybody that's had the misfortune to have train disruption on the tube system in London, there's a map of it on the screen, will know that it can cause enormous amounts of problems, and the same works in your own networks back in the data centers. If we have a particular piece of kit fall over, it can cause a lot of problems for us as we don't have additional routes and services, and a whole lot's very, very brittle. What I'm getting at is we can put loads of flexibility into the application delivery controller, and we can also put flexibility in the back end with obviously the virtual server infrastructure. But the bit in the middle, the network in the middle, remains fixed and static and brittle. So we need to find a way to get greater interoperability, to give us a mechanism to expand the capabilities of that, and that's next generation intelligent networks. Now, this isn't designed as an introduction to software-defined networking. If you'd like to read more about that, I've got a great piece on my blog about it. I'll give you the address at the end of this session. But ultimately, what we're looking to achieve now is more intelligence into that, so that when we provision more users at the front end, we can spin up resource at the back, and we can define a network path for those users to get their content fast and securely and so on. What's really important for this to happen is, though, that it needs collaboration from the vendors. Citrix have a great application delivery controller, and our friends over on the West Coast there at Cisco have the most fantastic range of networking technologies. It's very unusual, however, to see two such organizations suggesting that it would be better to combine their thought processes and roadmaps to give a more definitive method of being able to migrate to the cloud. We were overjoyed to see at Citrix Live back in London a couple of weeks ago a live demonstration of a Citrix NetScaler virtual appliance running directly on the Cisco Nexus 1110. Now, when you start to think about that capability and you start to see how these guys are starting to operate together, it really gets to be quite interesting to look at the capabilities and possibilities of what the future holds for us. And software-defined networking, from a buzzword and terminology last year to becoming reality this year, certainly looks to be the way forward for that. Now, Cisco aren't alone in their operations with Citrix. We've seen similar messages coming out from Palo Alto and Blue Cat and WebSense, to name others. Whereas we deliver these desktops, apps, voice and video as a service, with Citrix NetScaler being the beating heart of that, or if you like, bringing the cloud to life, as we say at cloudDNA. It's a really interesting concept, and we'd love to discuss this further with you if you have individual requirements around it. But certainly from today's session, what we then start to see is, regardless of the endpoint or the content that we're looking to deliver, or the location that that content sits in, whether it's on-premise in our own data center, or it's up in the cloud as a collaborative platform or of an extension of capability, delivering that content out to those user groups in a secure fashion, with clearly the availability that it's always there when we click on our www or we go to our access point, to be able to drive the performance, but give us scalability for future efficiencies and deliver greater efficiency at the back-end infrastructure, then you perhaps start to see why NetScaler is now being classed as the world's most advanced cloud network platform. My name's Al Taylor. It's been great talking to you. Thanks a lot for your time. Very much appreciated.